Hello you beautiful bastards, and before we begin today's episode, I'd just like to give a quick shout out to YouTuber Kelsey Copley, who so graciously informed me that my sweet and soulful greeting for y'all, hello you beautiful bastards, has unfortunately been plagiarized by some YouTuber named Philip DeFranco.
Sup, you beautiful bastards?
Who inexplicably was able to amass 6.4 million subscribers and publish over 2,500 videos in the 3 months since I started making my videos and thus began using my signature catchphrase. He was even able to somehow hack into his account and make it so his info page says that he began his account a whopping 13 years ago. Fuck, now I have to think up a whole new term of endearment for you guys. Hello you terrific taints? No. Hello you calamitous cucks? Shit. Whatever, I'll think of something later. Anyway, welcome to episode 8 of Game of Thrones Rewrite. Today's subject will be Theon Greyjoy. And as I stated in my last video, this episode will also feature revisions for the arcs of both Yara and Euron. Mostly Euron, cause, well... Before we begin, let me set down the structure that this episode is to follow, as since we are dealing with 3 characters, I want to make sure shit doesn't get too messy or confusing. We'll start off by discussing Theon's characterization in the show compared to the book, followed by a recap of Theon's arc up until the end of Season 5, which will then be followed by a short discussion on the changes made from the books. While these changes are not really all that detrimental to Theon's arc, they are quite interesting in terms of how adapting a narrative for a different medium may force writers to make radical changes to the source material. We'll then head into Season 6, which is where Theon returns to the Iron Islands and the quote-unquote Greyjoy plot really kicks in. And this is where we'll talk about Yara and Euron, as well as briefly discussing how the Greyjoy plot differs just a little bit from the books. And by a little bit, I mean completely omitting entire game-changing plot devices, as well as 2 Greyjoy POV characters, one of whom, by the way, has just landed in Meereen in the books. Not that there's anything important, or notable, or interesting, or insanely crucial to the most likely projected conclusion of the series going on in Meereen during this time, but yeah. And we will conclude with the resolutions of our 3 subjects. My biggest gripe with how the show handled the Greyjoys is the fact that their fates and arc conclusions were so isolated from one another. You'd think that the ultimate fates of each character would have something to do with one another, considering they are of the same family. But no, Yara's in the Iron Islands for all of Season 8, Theon dies at the Battle of Winterfell, and Euron is killed by Jaime. Yay! Let's dive into this and see if we can't do these characters some justice. When I first started this series, I was notably excited about writing Theon's video, so I could talk about and give praise to Alfie Allen's performance. Unfortunately, while many of the other actors and actresses of the series were singled out for acclaim, and rightfully so, Alfie's performance as Theon seemed to be one that wasn't all that discussed or raved about. But in retrospect, especially taking in his portrayal of the character as a whole over the course of the series, it is absolutely astounding just how truly good he was. From portraying the meek and pathetic Theon of the earlier seasons, to the emotionally devastated and scarred Theon in the mid-series, to the sullen and regretful Theon of the endgame. This role required a massive acting range, and Alfie nailed it, particularly in regards to the physical transformation that he makes over the course of the series. By the final season of the show, you can just see, just in his expression, everything he has gone through and the loss and regret he holds within his heart. Absolute perfection. And on top of the excellence of his performance, Theon has perhaps one of the most tragic and beautiful arcs of the show. At the mere age of 10, Theon was taken as a hostage of Eddard Stark at Winterfell following the failure of his father Balon's ill-fated rebellion against King Robert Baratheon. Though Theon was treated rather well by Ned and developed a close relationship with the Stark children, he was never deluded into thinking he was one of them. Hell, even Jon, though ostracized due to his perceived status as a bastard, knew, or at least thought at the time, that he had some sort of blood relation to the other Stark children, as well as his beloved Uncle Benjen, and that he had his true father by his side. Even at the end of the series, when Jon learns of his true parentage, he comes to realize that his true parents actually loved him, and those around him, though they may not have been his true parents or have siblings, did indeed care for him. Well, except Catelyn, but fuck her. But Theon never had any of that. As we see when he returns to the Iron Islands in Season 2, Balon is repulsed by his son, despite the fact that it was his own ineptitude as a commander which led to his pathetic excuse for a rebellion being crushed within a matter of months, which led to the death of his 2 elder sons, robbing Theon of having any sort of true brotherly relationship. And on top of all that, he shoves it in Theon's face to guilt trip him the moment he returns to his home after so many years. And Balon didn't even learn his fucking lesson, as he wants to rebel against the crown again. Balon's like that drunk old dude in your hometown you see every time you go back for Thanksgiving or some shit, and he's like drowning his sorrows in his 5th Coors Light as he jabbers on about his heyday in high school as a college football prospect when he was only a sophomore. But in Balon's case, he didn't even have a heyday. He was always on the punk-ass JV team. At least he had pretty progressive views on gender equality. That's something. Now, I know Theon is kind of hard to like in the show, at least in the beginning of the series. While Theon's plotline and characterization is pretty damn close to his book counterparts, the biggest difference in terms of characterization would have to be show Theon being, I don't know, like a little derpier? What is dead may never die. Like, book Theon isn't really as weak-willed as show Theon. He's a bit more brooding and mature, kind of like Robb in the show. Whereas show Theon really comes across a bit like kind of like your little brother who really wants to hang out with you and your older friends to prove that he's cool, but it just, no. Despite this deviation, I actually think this works well in the show. Theon's actions in Season 2 are a direct result of him trying to prove himself to his father and the rest of the Ironborn, even if it was pointless from the start. Thus, his hesitant and needy disposition actually suits the text quite well. And I think it puts a greater emphasis on how much Theon changes come the end of the series. Sort of like Jaime in a way, by the end of the series, Theon has become a man who no longer seeks the approval or admiration of those around him, but simply does what he believes he must in order to repent for his past actions. But yeah, since Theon is such a pussy at the start of the show, even though his book counterpart follows the same plot beats, and even commits his most heinous act of the series, the killing of the 2 farmers' boys at Winterfell, he is perceived as a bit more of a little bitch. But overall, in both the book and the show, Theon's actions, though traitorous, are understandable given the trauma of his past, of being ripped from his home, of being rejected by his true family and always held at an arm's distance by his surrogate one, of living a life knowing he is accepted neither as a Greyjoy nor Stark, in a world where your surname is such an integral part of who you are and acts as the foundation of your self-worth. And to see him go through literal hell, to be driven to insanity, yet break free from his mental captivity, and seek honor and identity on his own terms, it stands as one hell of an arc that should be remembered among the series' best. As I noted before, Theon's arc in the show is pretty damn faithful to his arc in the books. Not only that, but even when the writers were either forced to or just fucking decided to make certain changes to the source material, they went to great lengths to keep Theon's character beats pretty on point. And as I also said before, the way the writers handled Theon's arc progression while taking into account these changes is actually quite interesting. Yeah, this first half of the video is actually kind of gonna be full of semi-decent amount of praise for the writers. I know, I'm not happy about it either. But don't worry, as that good grace will have surely run out by the time we get to Season 6. Let's do this. Season 1 sees Theon as ward/hostage of Lord Ned Stark at Winterfell, following the crushing of Greyjoy's rebellion nearly a decade previous. Though he holds a close relationship with many of the Stark children, Robb in particular, Theon has made sure not to forget that he is not and will never be a true Stark. Despite this, Theon declares his loyalty to Robb, following Robb being declared king in the north and waging war against the Lannisters. Season 2 sees Theon traveling to his birthplace of Pike in an attempt to secure the support of his supportive and loving father, Balon Greyjoy, which serves as basically the first item on the long list of stupid-ass shit that Robb does prior to him enjoying the worst wedding reception of all time. I mean, shit, even Catelyn thought it was a bad idea. It's a pretty low bar there, Robbie. Seeing as Balon is slowly slipping into the sweet warm bath of senility, he rejects Theon's plea and instead wants to wage another rebellion against the mainlanders, and Theon, wanting to finally earn the approval of his father and the rest of the Ironborn, decides to betray Robb and take part in his father's stupid-ass plan. In an even more moronic attempt to earn the respect of his father, Theon and his group of Ironborn men take over Winterfell. Theon is spectacularly incompetent at holding Winterfell and ends up executing Roger Castle, losing his most prized hostages, and then scorching 2 innocent boys in order to cover up his ineptitude. Though his sister Yara pleads with Theon to abandon Winterfell, Theon refuses and he is soon besieged by a group of Bolton men. As Theon rallies his men to fight the Northern men to the death, his Ironborn men betray him and turn him over to their Northern enemies. Season 3 sees Theon being brutally tortured by the bastard of Roose Bolton, Ramsay Snow, which leads to a complete mental break and Theon taking on the moniker Reek. Season 4 sees Theon completely brainwashed by Ramsay and at the mercy of his control, demonstrated by him feigning a peace brokerage with the Ironborn at Mo Catelyn, who were then subsequently BTFO'd. And after successfully passing through Mo Catelyn, Season 4 ends with the Boltons with Theon in tow arriving back at Winterfell. Season 5 sees Theon still under the control of Ramsay, that is until the arrival of Sansa Stark, who has been given to the Boltons by Littlefinger with the intention of having her marry Ramsay, therefore securing the Bolton hold over the north. And it's seeing Sansa being afflicted by Ramsay that begins to draw Theon out of his psychosis. Season 5 culminates with Theon finally breaking free of his mental prison, and he and Sansa make their escape from Winterfell. And then of course Season 6 sees Theon heading back to the Iron Islands, and that's where things start to get fucky. but we'll get to that. Let's rewind and see what changes the showrunners made to Theon's arc for seasons 1 through 5. Now, as I said before, Theon's arc is left surprisingly intact. Season 1, like with pretty much every other character, is pretty faithful to the source material, which isn't surprising in Theon's case considering he doesn't do all that much anyway. In season 2, Theon's arrival at Pike and his betrayal of Robb play out pretty much the same as they do in the book. But then once Theon arrives at Winterfell, that's when things start to stray a little bit, and we start to see Derpy show Theon rear his head. Again, Theon is pretty incompetent at holding Winterfell in the book too, but the show seems to really want to get the point across that Theon just sucks absolute balls. One of the biggest changes is Theon killing Roderick Castle. This was kinda dumb, seeing as Roderick isn't even at Winterfell when Theon takes Winterfell in the book. It was recycled from another plot point in the books, the death of Benford Tallheart, a friend of Robb and Theon's from before the War of the Five Kings began, who, along with his men, were defeated by the Ironborn at the Stony Shore. It's weird too because Theon doesn't even actually kill Benford. Theon pieces out before Benford gets his ass drowned. I surmise that the writers had Theon kill Roderick to sort of hit the plot beat of Theon having an inner conflict between his devotion to the Ironborn and the Starks, which is kind of the same beat that Benford's death hits. But I actually think that Theon's conversation with Bran accomplishes this a lot more gracefully and emotionally. Perhaps they did it to make Theon a morally ambiguous character, thus setting up his redemption arc, which seems unnecessary seeing as he kills the ever-loving shit out of 2 innocent boys an episode later. So yeah, I think they added this to really drive home the point at just how inept show Theon is supposed to be, what with them turning his execution of Roderick into a highlight of the Lumberjack World Championships. The other big deviation is how Theon ends up losing control of Winterfell. In the show, Theon decides to go all YOLO and die in a blaze of glory against the besieging northern forces, which of course is not fine and dandy with the other Ironborn. But in the book, after realizing that holding Winterfell is a futile endeavor, Theon gathers the Ironborn and lets them leave if they wish. Most do, but a few hang around. Theon tries one last gambit by threatening the life of Beth Castle, Roderick's daughter, but by this point Theon knows he's fucked and is on the verge of just surrendering and taking the black. And that is when the sack of Winterfell occurs, and holy shit, this is where the deviations the show made from the book get really cool and interesting. Now, as we know, in the show, Theon is betrayed by the Ironborn, who then turn him over to the Bolton forces. We find out only later at the end of season 3 that said Ironborn were then flayed alive by Ramsay, and Theon was taken to the Dreadfort to be tortured into insanity. Yeah, this is way different from the book. And in order to understand how the events of the sack of Winterfell unfold in the book, well, we need to talk about Reek. Now, you show watchers may be saying, you mean Theon? Reek was the name given to him by Ramsay at the end of season 3. Well, if you had read the books, then you would know that Reek, or should I say the original Reek, was in fact a real person. OG Reek was a Bolton soldier who was originally assigned to be the servant of Ramsay. You know, to tutor him, teach him how to fight, make sure he doesn't act out, something that Ramsay was known to do from time to time. Well, this plan backfired like a motherfucker, as Reek was pretty much the worst influence one could be. Reek and Ramsay were basically the Jordan and Pippin of being sick fucking bastards, with our boys finding entertainment by having Ramsay hunt and kill innocent girls, followed by Reek raping them. And yes, that last sentence is in fact in the correct order. Now, in A Clash of Kings, we learn from Lady Donella Hornwood, while she is visiting Winterfell for the Harvest Feast, that Ramsay Bolton is gathering his forces at the Dreadfort. On her way back to Hornwood, Lady Donella is kidnapped by Ramsay and starved to death. This rightfully pisses the North the fuck off, and a group of Northern men track down and kill Ramsay. They then take Reek to Winterfell and lock him in the dungeon. Reek is later set free by Theon after Theon takes over Winterfell, and Reek sort of becomes Theon's right-hand man. And it was in fact Reek who suggested the idea to kill the two boys and pass them off as Bran and Rickon Stark. Following Winterfell being besieged by Roderick Castle, Theon, in a last-ditch effort to keep his hold over Winterfell, sends Reek off to find men who will support them. And Reek does well, returning with 600 men from the Dreadfort. And in a shocking twist, the Dreadfort men, those loyal to Roose Bolton, and thus loyal to Robb Stark, launch a surprise attack on the Northern men, killing, among others, Roderick Castle. Assuming they must be friendly, Theon lets the Bolton men into Winterfell and is approached by Reek, but then it is revealed that Reek is in fact Ramsay. So yeah, it's revealed that when Ramsay and Reek were being hunted by Northern men following their murder of Lady Donella, Ramsay, realizing they could not escape, switched identities with Reek by way of taking Reek's clothes and smearing himself with the feces of the dead girl that Reek was raping. So when the Northern men killed Ramsay, they in fact killed Reek, and it was the real Ramsay who was brought to Winterfell under the guise of Reek. It was Ramsay who told Theon to kill the two boys, and it was Ramsay who brought his own Dreadfort men to Winterfell, betrayed the Northern forces, and commenced the sack of Winterfell. Now this is a literary technique that Martin utilizes quite often in his series. I apologize to any English or literary majors currently listening to this, as I for the life of me do not know if there's a proper name for this technique, but for the sake of this video I'm going to refer to it as the impostor. This technique is when, in the text of a novel, one character's true identity is concealed by having either the writer or the other characters refer to them as another character. So for example, in Season 3, Barristan Selmy finds Dany across the narrow sea and pledges his fealty to her. But in the book, this same scene takes place, but it features a man by the name of Arstan Whitebeard. It is only later discovered that the man the reader has known as Arstan is in fact Barristan Selmy in disguise. The reason this works is because all the chapters of the book series are POV style. Dany obviously has no idea what Barristan Selmy looks like, and thus when he tells her his name is Arstan Whitebeard, she, and thus we, have no reason to believe otherwise. This is such a fucking kick-ass technique. Because the chapters are all POV, our current POV character could be talking to another character whom we know and love. But if our POV character doesn't recognize them, we as readers won't know who this person truly is. This encourages readers to really delve into Martin's prose and, if they doubt the true identity of a particular character, search for little hints that Martin has left as to who this person truly is. But of course, this technique cannot be utilized in the television show. Had Barristan introduced himself to Dany in Season 3 as Arstan, Dany would know he was Barristan, but we as viewers obviously would because, well, we have eyes. The imposter technique cannot be used in a visual medium because it requires that we as an audience are left in the dark as to the character's true identity. And thus the showrunners just had Barristan reveal himself right out of the gate. Although I thought it would have been pretty cool if Barristan kept his true identity from Dany and Jorah, and then the show watchers kept on the edge of their seat, wondering if Barristan is up to something sinister. Anyway, but here's the weird thing. Though the imposter technique usually isn't able to be utilized in a visual medium such as a television show, it actually could have been in the case of Ramsay and Reek. Though Ramsay is referenced by name, he does not make an appearance in the show until Season 3. So had Theon found Ramsay posing as Reek in the Winterfell dungeon, we as an audience would not have known he was actually Ramsay because we have no idea what Ramsay looks like at this point in the show. And when Reek returns to Winterfell with the Dreadfort men and reveals his true identity as Ramsay, we as an audience would have been just as surprised as Theon was in the book. So the showrunners actually could have gone with this. But alas, we get Derp Theon getting betrayed by his own men, which I guess was to make him more in line with the pussy-ass character interpretation they decided to go with in the show. However, there may be another reason they decided to do away with the whole Ramsay-Reek plot, and it has to do with the surprise factor of the Red Wedding. Now, in both the books and the show, the Red Wedding reigns pretty undisputed as the most shocking event of the entire series. And while the betrayal of the Starks by the Freys and Boltons is quite the surprise in both the books and the show, well, in the books, it's kind of, like, obvious. Okay, not obvious, but rather there was a lot of telegraphing that something like the Red Wedding was on the horizon. And I'm not just talking about the more symbolic foreshadowing, such as Dany's vision in the House of the Undying, or the prophetic rhymes of Patchface. Yeah, I would advise you show watchers to inquire as to who Patchface is. He's pretty fucking creepy. I'm also talking about a number of suspicious actions taken by several characters leading up to the Red Wedding, one of which we have already spoken about, the betrayal of Roderick Castle and his northern forces by Ramsay Bolton and his Dreadfort men at the end of A Clash of Kings. At this point in the story, the Boltons are loyal to the Starks, so why are they attacking northern men? Later in A Storm of Swords, word of the sack of Winterfell reaches Roose Bolton, who tells Robb that the Ironborn were the ones who reduced Winterfell to rubble. Now, we obviously know that this is incorrect, but we don't necessarily have any reason to believe Roose is lying. Knowing Ramsay's disposition, it's entirely plausible that Ramsay simply lied to Roose about what happened at Winterfell in order to cover up his own sadistically impulsive actions. That is, if it weren't for a particular conversation that takes place a few chapters earlier in that same book. In the show, Season 2 sees Arya Stark serving as cupbearer for Tywin Lannister, but in the book, she's actually cupbearer for Roose Bolton, following him taking control of Harrenhal after Tywin's departure. It is in Arya's last POV chapter in A Clash of Kings that Arya overhears a conversation between Roose and a number of his Frey advisors. The Freys make a plea to Roose, saying they no longer believe, seeing as how Stannis got his ass handed to him at the Battle of Blackwater, that Robb and the Northern forces can best the Lannisters and that they should sue for peace. Roose then adjourns the meeting. Later on in the same chapter, Arya overhears the son of Walder Frey, Elmar, crying about his family being dishonored and his betrothal to a princess, this is actually in reference to Arya, has been called off. Now, Arya has no idea of the significance of this seemingly innocuous little tidbit. The dishonor that Elmar is referring to is the fact that Robb Stark, who was known for making just really fucking stupid ass decisions, was unable to keep it in his pants for 5 fucking minutes and fuck some basic ass chick named Jane Westerling and married her, thus voiding his original agreement with Walder Frey to marry one of his daughters to solidify the alliance between the Starks and the Freys. God fucking damn it! So let's put these tidbits of info together. Roose has a meeting with his Frey advisors who claim they no longer believe Robb can win the war and want to sue for peace. We then learn that not only do the Freys believe Robb will lose the war, but they are pissed as fuck due to Robb smashing Westerling Poon. Later on, Ramsay and his Dreadfort men betray the northern men of Roger Castle and burn Winterfell. And one of the last things that Ramsay says after he knocks Theon's lights out and the sacking of Winterfell begins is, "Save me the Freys and burn the rest." A line that may seem irrelevant at the time, but upon rereading the section after knowing about the Red Wedding, the picture becomes crystal clear. The most likely explanation for this is that it was after that meeting with his Frey advisors at Harrenhal that Roose decided to betray the Starks and conspired with both Tywin Lannister and Walder Frey to orchestrate the Red Wedding. At some point after this decision, Roose most likely informed Ramsay of his plan, which is why Ramsay not only betrayed the Northerners upon their arrival at Winterfell, but also spared the Freys, as his father Roose had made an alliance with them. Oh, and just in case you need some additional symbolic foreshadowing that Roose was planning on betraying the Starks, immediately after his meeting with his Frey advisors, Roose decides to go on a hunting trip. For wolves. It's just so fucking cool how Martin sprinkles hints throughout his prose throughout multiple characters' POVs, which may not make sense at the time of reading them, but upon your second read of the book, suddenly all these seemingly random and meaningless actions take on a completely new context. So yeah, perhaps the showrunners thought that by visually showing the Boltons betraying the Northerners prior to the sack of Winterfell would dampen the surprise effect of the Red Wedding, which, I guess, maybe. In the show, the Red Wedding comes out of fucking nowhere. Now, that's not to say that there were not actions preceding it that explain why it happened, but the show did not feature the very clear and in retrospect bleedingly obvious signs that the betrayal was coming. And to be fair, I think that's kind of what the showrunners were going for, so yeah. Anyway, back on track. So the sack of Winterfell plays out a lot differently than in the books, but Theon's subsequent capture and torture at the hands of Ramsay is pretty faithful to the book. Well, kind of, seeing as in the books, Theon flat out disappears for 2 whole books following the sack of Winterfell. There are whispers by other characters throughout A Storm of Swords and A Feast for Crows about Theon, but the reader isn't really sure if he's dead or still being tortured. But in either case, the reader starts to think that we have seen the last of Theon Greyjoy. That is until A Dance of Dragons chapter 12, which is entitled Reek 1. We of course are at first confused, seeing as Reek was said to have been killed in a Clash of Kings, and Ramsay has no reason to keep up his facade as Reek. But shortly into the chapter, we realize the horrible truth, that Reek is in fact Theon. We don't realize this at first because, well, if you thought Theon had it bad in the show, holy fuck. Theon looks like he has aged decades, his skin and hair are fucked, Ramsay cut off the skin on his fingers and toes before cutting them off altogether. Ironically, the one thing we know that happens in the show, Theon's castration, is merely implied in the book. Now obviously even HBO would be hesitant about showing this amount of gratuitous torture, so they just opted for the far more tame version which we see in the show. So yeah, all the torture we see take place in season 3 is completely absent in the books. And Theon's plot in season 4, which sees Theon and the Boltons taking Mo Caelan and ends with the Bolton forces arriving at Winterfell, this is covered in like 3 or 4 chapters in A Dance of Dragons. But that's fine. The showrunners needed to space out the plot progression of Theon in order for the timelines of each character to mesh in the show. What else could they have done? Just have Theon completely disappear for an entire season? Could you imagine if the writers just said fuck it, and instead of thinking of a way to feature a particular character in an entire season of the show, they just kept them out altogether? That would be stupid as hell. But in any case, the writers get Theon's arc back on track. In both the book and the show, Theon arrives with the Boltons at Winterfell, and upon seeing the marriage of Ramsay to Sansa in the show and Jane Poole in the book, Theon slowly begins to regain his sanity and his identity, as displayed in the book by Martin through the titles of Theon's POV chapters. His first few being titled after his identity as Reek, and his last being titled after his true name, Theon. And both the book and the show conclude with Theon saving Sansa and Jane respectively. And you know what, folks? I fucked up. I pulled a D&D. So when I started this rewrite series, I didn't necessarily sit down and write an entire outline of each and every character I was planning on exploring. I simply began with the major characters and figured I could adjust the arcs of the smaller characters accordingly. And so far, things have gone pretty smoothly. Until now. Per our last episode, we rewrote Sansa's arc to see that she was not sent by Littlefinger to Winterfell to be married to Ramsay. But if that's the case, then how does Theon escape Winterfell? Sansa being tormented by Ramsay was what initially commenced Theon breaking free from his psychosis. So if she isn't there, then how does Theon end up snapping out of it and escaping Winterfell at the end of season 5? Well, I guess we could just have Theon stay at Winterfell until the end of the Battle of the Bastards, and this is how he eventually shacks up with the Starks again, right? Well, that would work, except for
what you did for her is the only reason I'm not killing you.
If Theon doesn't save Sansa, then what reason is there for Jon to not kill Theon as soon as the Starks take back Winterfell at the end of season 6? Well, wait, we can just add Jeyne Poole back into the mix and have her be the one saved by Theon at the end of season 5. This would explain how Theon breaks from his psychosis and escapes Winterfell, except this doesn't work either. In the book, Theon doesn't leave for the Iron Islands as soon as he escapes Winterfell. He and Jeyne are brought to Stannis Baratheon, who is yet to face off against the Boltons at the Battle in the Ice, and Theon's fate from there is sort of up in the air. But even if we did have Theon send Jeyne to Castle Black with Brienne and Pod at the end of season 5, while Theon heads back to the Iron Islands, this still would fuck shit up, because when Theon arrives at Dragonstone in season 7, again, there's no real reason for Jon to not murder his ass. I guess you could say that Sansa is merciful to Theon since he saved Jeyne, but I think that would be pretty weak. Sansa had not seen Jeyne for years, and the relationship was not really that well established. I don't think having Sansa and Jon forgive Theon for betraying their family, stealing their home, and causing the deaths of pretty much everyone they ever knew, just because he saved Sansa's estranged friend would fly. In addition to this, though Sansa being at Winterfell in the first place was dumb as hell, having the person who snaps Theon out of his psychosis be a Stark actually is far more thematically sensical to the story. Jeyne serves her purpose well enough in the book, but the fact that in the show that it is Sansa, a member of the very family that has fostered Theon for over half his life, being the one who kicks Theon into redemptive action, makes a lot more sense in my opinion. So yeah, I fucked up. I don't know what to do at this point. I have no idea as to how to make this work. So, yeah, I think I'm gonna call it. Sorry, but yeah, I really messed this shit up. So, I guess this is the end. Thank you for the support. But yeah, sorry to disappoint you guys. I'll probably end up doing some other projects on this channel, so keep an eye out for those. But yeah, thanks for sticking around. Thanks. See you. However, is there a way out of this pickle? Is there a way to make it so that Theon regaining his sanity and escaping from Winterfell makes sense and prevents him from getting his shit wrecked by Jon and Sansa when he returns to Dragonstone in season 7? Who could possibly take Sansa/Jeyne Poole's place in this scenario? Could there be such a person? I'm rolling in the We did it, guys. We actually found a purpose for Rickon Stark. Now, Rickon doesn't have the biggest role in the books, of course, although there are many interesting theories as to the larger role that Rickon may play in the grand scheme of things come the end of the series. But his part in the books is practically a 15-part Netflix miniseries compared to his treatment in the show. And by that I mean most fans were scratching their heads by the end of season 6, wondering why the showrunners decided to have him in the show at all, considering they ended up using him as drama fodder for the Battle of the Bastards. But in our rewrite scenario, Rickon actually serves as a crucial part of our story. In the show, Rickon is brought to Winterfell towards the beginning of season 6, and he stays there until he is killed by Ramsay just prior to the Battle of the Bastards. But our rewrite will see Rickon being brought to the Boltons at Winterfell a season earlier, say the 2nd or 3rd episode of season 5, right around the same time Sansa arrives at Winterfell in the show. Now, I guess the only problem may be whether or not Asha and Rickon could reach Last Hearth in this time following their departure from Bran, Hodor, and the Reed children, but seeing as how the show could not give less of a shit about travel time, neither will I. So season 5 will see Rickon being brought to Winterfell as a hostage of the Boltons. Perhaps Roose plans to have Ramsay brainwash Rickon the same way he did to Theon, which would allow Roose and Ramsay to have complete control over the North via commanding the brainwashed Rickon into doing their bidding. But of course, this does not sit well with Theon. Seeing Rickon, the boy whose family he had betrayed, whose home he led to ruin, whom he had seen grown for his entire life, possibly on the verge of facing the same fate that Theon himself has endured, this is what triggers Theon beginning to regain his sanity. We could add a number of scenes between Theon and Rickon at first angry at Theon for betraying his home, but later, after seeing the extent of the damage that Ramsay has done on Theon, does his best to remind Theon of who he truly is. This culminates at the end of season 5 during the Battle in the Ice. Theon uses the pandemonium of the battle as an opportunity to free Rickon, and together they make their escape from Winterfell. This explains how Theon regains his sanity and escapes from Winterfell. It explains why Theon is not killed by Jon upon his return to Dragonstone in season 7. And believe it or not, it gives an even better reason for Ramsay to attack Jon and his forces in season 6. Many of you pointed point out that Ramsay attacking Jon Snow in season 6, as he does both in the show and in our rewrite, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Jon is a bastard and therefore has no true claim to Winterfell, so Ramsay setting out to eliminate him is unnecessary. Now, I personally think Ramsay would want to kill Jon regardless of his bastard sass in order to prevent him from organizing a northern rebellion against the Boltons, but it's a fair point. However, in our rewrite, following Rickon escaping with Theon, Ramsay obviously assumes that if Rickon is going anywhere, he's going to Castle Black to meet up with Jon. And this is why Ramsay must attack Jon at Castle Black, in order to snuff out the last proper male heir of Winterfell. This obviously does not go as planned, as Ramsay is defeated at the Battle of the Bastards. Now, the question is, what happens to Rickon after the Battle of the Bastards? Wouldn't he be the one the Northerners choose as their leader over Jon, as he is the proper heir to Winterfell? Probably not. By this point in the series, the idea that namesakes and proper heirs are the end-all be-all is kind of waning. Despite Jon's status as a bastard, the Northerners chose him as king of the North due to his honor and courage. And in any case, seeing as they are in the middle of 3 wars by season 7, they aren't going to put Rickon in the hot seat and ask him to start making strategic decisions. I don't even think Rickon would want to be top dog of the North, even if they asked him. Rickon wants to just straight up chill and eat some apple cakes. Dude has it figured out, man. Okay, let me get back on track before this becomes a full-on Rickon rewrite. So Theon's arc in season 1 I'd leave alone. Season 2, I would keep the way they handled the sack of Winterfell intact. I prefer the way Martin did it in the book, but the show is going for a different feel, so that's fine. The only thing I would change is not having Theon kill Roger Castle. Just have him die at the hands of Ramsay during the sack of Winterfell like in the book. Seasons 3 and 4 are pretty much fine. Season 5 will see Rickon take the place of Sansa as the person who brings Theon back from insanity and whom Theon rescues at the end of season 5. And season 6 will begin with Theon running into Brienne and Podrick as he does in the show, and he sends Rickon to Castle Black with them as he returns to the Iron Islands. And now on to season 6.
And here we go.
So in the show, Theon returns to Pike where Yara wishes to become ruler of the Iron Islands. But this doesn't happen as their uncle Euron rolls up and, after blatantly admitting that he killed his brother Balon, oh, we'll get to that, takes control of the Iron Islands and vows to form an alliance with Daenerys Targaryen and take over the mainland. Theon and Yara peace out with those who support them and make it to Dany first, forming their own alliance with her and joining her on her journey to Westeros. Okay, so this part's gonna get nuts because the Greyjoy storyline in the books is vastly reduced and streamlined. First thing to note is that Theon isn't even present for any of this in the books. The whole Kingsmoot with Euron becoming leader of the Iron Islands happens in A Feast for Crows, whereas Theon is held as prisoner of the Boltons all the way up to the following book in the series, A Dance of Dragons. So therefore, we see the Greyjoy plot unfold through the eyes of a new POV character, Asha Greyjoy, aka Yara Greyjoy. The showrunners decided to change Asha's name in order to prevent audiences from confusing her with Asha, even though these two characters are never together on screen, and even if their names do sound similar, you can easily differentiate them due to the context in which their names are spoken. Also, the showrunners made her name an anagram of Arya, which would probably still confuse the conceptual idiots that they were worried about in the first place, but I digress. To keep things simple, I'm just going to refer to the character as Yara for both the books and show plots. So Yara in the show is kind of the same as she is in the book, but not really. She's just as headstrong and badass as she is in the show, but she's also, surprisingly, a lot more empathetic and, believe it or not, progressive in the book. In the book, Yara's soft spot for her brother Theon is evident pretty much throughout the entire series, whereas in the show, she seems bipolar at times in regards to her relationship with Theon. Like, Yara tries to save Theon in season 4 from Ramsay, but then after her first try, she basically just gives up. And then there's that scene in season 7 where she shows great sympathy to Theon regarding his trauma, but like 5 seconds before that, she makes fun of him not having a dick, and it's like, okay. In the show, it seems like Yara's writing in terms of a relationship to Theon is just uneven. In addition to this, as I already mentioned, Yara in the books is actually more progressive than she is in the show. During the Kingsmoot, as Yara is making her case as to why she should rule the Iron Islands, she puts forth a plan for the Iron Islands to change their raping and reaving ways, as it has only led them to despair in the past. Yara in the books is set up as the one who is trying to bring the Iron Islanders into a new successful way of life, in contrast to her father's two ill-fated rebellions against the mainland. Whereas in the show, Yara just wants to be ruler kind of because she does. It's sort of the same problem that Sansa faces, in that her desire to rule is framed as more of a selfish one. Yara in the book has more magnanimous goals in her pursuit of power, whereas Yara in the show is just sort of a greedy bitch. Ironically, you'd think a mainstream Hollywood adaptation would want to keep this character more progressive, but in the show, Yara is actually kind of cool with raping and reaving, which is kind of off-putting. But hey, at least they made her bisexual in the show, right? Because I don't know. For the record, I'm not really miffed at her being bisexual, but more so because it feels pretty exploitive, seeing as they don't develop it at all, and it just comes off as more of an attempt by the showrunners to add some surface level diversity. What's also pretty nuts is that while a good portion of the Greyjoy plot is seen through the eyes of Yara in the book, following the King's Moot where Euron is declared ruler of the Iron Islands, Yara doesn't go to Dany as she does in the show. She fucks off to Deepwood Moat where she's kidnapped by Stannis, and it is during her captivity when she is reunited with her brother Theon following his escape from Winterfell and his subsequent capture by Stannis' forces. Now, seeing as Stannis will most likely win the battle in the ice, and considering Yara seems to be forming a mutual respect with Stannis in the book, is there a chance that we could see a Stannis v Euron sometime in the future in the books, which will result in the conceptual busting of my nut? May just be wishful thinking on my part. Anyway, so yeah, Yara leaves the Iron Islands after the King's Moot, so she is not our POV for what happens in the Iron Islands from that point on. Instead, we are given two new POV characters, Euron and Victarion Greyjoy, the brothers of Euron and Balon. Now, Euron is actually in the show, but in a vastly reduced capacity. Following a near-death experience when he was younger, Euron became a priest of the drowned god. And just like his brother Victarion and Yara and Theon, he fucking hates Euron. Not only because he fears Euron will lead the Ironborn to ruin due to Euron's dabbling in black magic, more on that later, but also, as it is revealed later in the books, Euron sexually abused Aeron and their late brother Euron when they were children. In the books, Aeron, following Euron becoming ruler of the Iron Islands, conspires to bring Euron down, but is captured and tormented by Euron. Now, this is where we last left Aeron in the books, and to be honest, his removal from the show isn't the biggest deal. He's a great character, but his overall role in the endgame in the series isn't super clear at this point. That is a lot less true when it comes to the second POV character that was removed from the show entirely, and that is Yara and Theon's other uncle, Victarion Greyjoy, Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet. Like Aeron, Victarion also hates Euron's fucking guts, due to the fact that he believes that Euron seduced and impregnated his third wife, though it's more likely that Euron actually raped her. Victarion, in order to retain his honor, beat his wife to death, but refrained from killing Euron, as kinslaying is considered totally not cool. Yeah, I never said Victarion was that likable of a character, okay? So, following Euron becoming ruler of the Iron Islands, Euron sent Victarion to Meereen in order to extend to Daenerys Targaryen Euron's offer of marriage, which was recycled in the show by having Theon and Yara head to Meereen to seek out Dany themselves. But of course, seeing Victarion fucking hates Euron, Victarion plans to double-cross Euron and offer his own hand in marriage to Dany. In the books, the last we see of him is his arrival in Meereen just as the second siege of the city begins, and where he goes from there is yet to be seen. So that was a rundown as to how the Greyjoy plot differs in the book. Now, I get it. It's a lot with a lot more characters and plot threads, so the showrunner's decision to streamline this by having Yara and Theon basically taking over Victarion's plot, I guess that's fine. Believe it or not, my main gripe with how the show handled the Greyjoy plotline has nothing really to do with what they omitted. I mean, sure, I love the plot in the books, but I get why they streamlined it. What I don't understand and what I can't forgive is... And now we have come to Euron Greyjoy. Holy what the actual fuck. Book readers rejoiced as they learned that the biggest, baddest villain of the series was to be portrayed in the television adaptation. The man who was basically the third Pokemon evolution of Joffrey Baratheon was about to barge his ass into the story and make our heroes piss their pants. And what did we get come season 6?
Along with my big cock.
Basically just a frat boy pirate. For some reason the showrunners made show Euron so clownish and over the top, and it just comes off as silly. Euron is formidable, yes, but he never comes across as scary or intimidating the same way that, say, the Night King does. And therefore, whenever he's on screen, it serves as, at best, a source of humor, and at worst, an annoyance. Euron's character is stripped of most of his more interesting characteristics, thus making him a cookie-cutter villain. Yeah, he's just so flat and boring. Don't get me wrong, Pillow Asbeck is fantastic in his role, and he plays this character the best he possibly could, but he just doesn't have that much to work with. No interesting backstory, no ulterior or complex motives. He's just a drunken cutthroat who wants the throne. Like, okay. So anyway, I'm done with show Euron for now. And you know what that means. Book Euron, bitches. Book Euron truly lives up to the final iteration of the psychotic main villain of Martin's series. As in the show, Euron does not show up until after Balon's death. While in the show, the reason for his exile really isn't explained. His exile in the book is due to his rape and impregnation of his brother Victarion's third wife. During his exile, Euron sailed all over the world, pillaging and plundering, accompanied by his crew aboard the Silence, his ship that was named such due to Euron's habit of cutting out the tongues of those who serve him. Now, while in the show, Euron just flat out tells the Ironborn that he killed his brother, and for some reason everyone is more or less chill with it, Book Euron is not that stupid. We don't get confirmation that Euron killed Balon until later on in the series. And even then, it's implied that Euron didn't do the deed himself, but rather hired a faceless man to do it for him. Euron arrives for the King's Moot and is able to win over the Ironborn, not only by ensuring them that they will continue their lifestyle of raping and reaving, something that Yara wants to disinter people from, but also by claiming that he has a plan to take over Westeros via the use of dragons. Dany's dragons to be exact, and he plans to control said dragons via Dragonbinder, a 6-foot-tall horn that is said to be able to bend the will of dragons. During Euron's travels during his exile, he became obsessed with black magic. His lips are stained blue as he is addicted to the Shade of the Evening, a magic substance that has hallucinogenic effects, but also seems to have some prophetic qualities as well, as it was the same substance that Dany drank just before she entered and had her visions in the House of the Undying. This may hint at Euron being able to see into the future to some extent, making him even more of a threat than he already was. It's also implied that Euron has kidnapped the Warlocks of Qarth, the same ones who tried to steal Dany's dragons in Season 2, and has forced them to disclose to him their black magic secrets. There is no limit to the tricks that Euron may have up his sleeve. On top of that, Euron is a master manipulator. He was able to easily persuade the other Ironborn to his cause. Some even theorized that he may have used some sort of black magic to influence their thoughts. Also, his plan of having his brother Victarion bring the Dragonhorn to Meereen with Euron's offer of marriage to Daenerys, yeah, something's probably fucky with that. Why would Euron give Victarion, the man who wanted to kill him for raping his wife, such a prized possession, and how could he not foresee Victarion's betrayal? Well, maybe he did. Maybe Victarion is doing exactly what Euron had planned on him doing. What that is exactly, we have yet to see. TLDR, picture a man with the sociopathy of Ramsay, the cunning and strategic manipulation skills of Littlefinger, the iron will and commanding power of Stannis motherfucking Baratheon, add a dash of fucking Voldemort, and you get Book Euron. That is how much of a force to be reckoned with Euron is in the books. Also, he has an eye patch in the book which earned him the nickname Crow's Eye, cause fuck yeah. And in the show, they gave us... I'm not jaded or anything, okay? Now, as I said before, I get why they made some of the choices they made. Streamlining most of the Greyjoy plot, diverting the arc of Theon and Yara to fill some plot holes, that's fine. Believe it or not, I kinda even give them a pass for getting rid of the Dragonhorn. While the Dragonhorn itself is an important aspect of the book series, as it no longer positions Daenerys as such an undisputed, unstoppable force, the show really toned down a lot of the magic and fantastical aspects of the novels, so therefore the Dragonhorn might come off as more of a shoehorned in plot device in the show. Not that the auto-aim scorpions weren't, but I digress. And to be honest, for the most part, I don't have any massive problems with how they handled Euron in the show. Now, when I say Euron, I mean show Euron. I have already made peace with the fact that show Euron is a completely different character than book Euron, to the point where you wouldn't be able to even recognize him. But as for how they handled this drunken frat boy who got lost on his way to a Pirates of the Caribbean themed house party, it's fine. Everything he does is pretty predictable and boring and safe, but there you go. However, I do have a couple of what the fuck things about show Euron to discuss. The first is what the fuck is up with him and Cersei. In Season 7, Euron makes an alliance with Cersei, which is the smartest thing he could do after Yara and Theon make their pact with Dany. But then, like, does Euron actually plan to rule with Cersei? Euron is sociopathic and obsessed with power. The fuck would he chill with sharing his rule? When Theon and Yara visit Dany and tell them about Euron's offer of marriage, Theon informs Dany that
he murdered our father and would have murdered us. He'll murder you as soon as you have what he wants.
Well, yeah, that sounds about right from what we know about Euron. So wouldn't Euron be planning to do this to Cersei too? Why wouldn't he just slit Cersei's throat as soon as possible and then just take over King's Landing? You have Dany on her way to fuck KL's shit up, which you can then use to stoke fear in the hearts of the citizens, and it's not like they had any sworn loyalty to Cersei anyway, seeing as she committed a fucking terror attack on her own people. And Euron seemed pretty pops when he brought Ilaria and Tyene to Cersei. Say Euron kills Cersei and tells the people of King's Landing, I'm literally your only chance of survival against the dragon, bitch. You think the people are going following the revolt or something. This is literally what Euron did to Balon. He just said, yeah, I killed them, what are you gonna do? And they did dick. So I guess to fix this, we need a way to make Cersei necessary to Euron's plan. Perhaps Cersei has made a deal with the Golden Company that has a contingency if Cersei is to die that the deal is no longer valid, and therefore Euron needs to keep Cersei alive until after Dany and the Northerners are dealt with. Would make the most sense. I would assume Cersei is not stupid enough to trust Euron, and Euron is not stupid enough to trust Cersei. They know they need each other to have any chance against Dany and her dragons, but on the off chance they win, I would assume both would not be chill with sharing, right? In our rewrite, we have Cersei sort of knowing she has no chance against Dany and merely wants to survive long enough to give birth to a child. So I guess we could just throw a throwaway line in there for Cersei, perhaps to Jaime, that she knows Euron will kill her as soon as they win the Battle of King's Landing, so she simply ensures that Gregor is constantly on his ass and knows what to do when the time comes. I guess this fits both of their characters a little bit better. The other thing is regarding him taking Yara prisoner and bringing her to King's Landing as a gift to Cersei. So I get that Cersei obviously wants her revenge against Ellaria and Tyene. That makes sense. And I guess Yara decided to support Dany, which is technically a betrayal, so I guess bringing her to Cersei is also a way of showing his loyalty to her. But like, why doesn't Euron kill Yara like right after that? He knows Cersei will take care of Ellaria Tyene, but what motive does he have for keeping Yara alive? Is the answer that it allows Theon to rescue her in a super rush manner at the beginning of season 8? I really love how they made Theon's rescue of Yara seem like it's gonna be this big redemption odyssey for him in season 8, and that is just like...
Come with me if you want to live.
But yeah, Euron keeping her alive seems pretty damn contrived. I also guess the writers had to have Yara get saved before the Battle of King's Landing, seeing as she is being held prisoner on the Silence, and the Iron Fleet gets torched within minutes of the battle beginning. Maybe we could have a throwaway line in there claiming that Euron is holding Yara prisoner to make sure the Ironborn that support her don't try anything fucky. Doesn't really make any sense, seeing as they pose no real threat to him either way. But there you go. No joke, this video is getting delayed just because I am now just realizing how Euron's character's decisions make no fucking sense. And I'm not even gonna talk about his weird incessant desire to fuck Cersei and kill Jaime. They make it seem like doing these things are his primary motivations, and it's like, why? Why are you so obsessed with fucking the queen and killing the Kingslayer? Oh, is it because he's a drunken frat boy? Gotcha. Okay, that's enough raging at the shitty Euron we got. Let's back it up. So the writers actually did a pretty decent job of setting up Theon's final conflict for the final season in season 7. Euron attacks their forces on the way back from Dorne and kidnaps Yara. This kickstarts Theon's final push to regain his sense of self-worth and earn the respect of the other Ironborn, as he had failed to do so many times in the past, in order to set off and rescue his sister, just as she had done at the end of season 3, in order to rescue him from the Boltons. Season 7 ends with a pretty standard yet effective call to action, with Theon earning the respect of his men and setting off on his journey to save his sister. Now, I don't know about you, but after this scene, I figured they were gonna make his rescue of Yara be the finale of his arc, but nah, they wrap that shit up immediately and then make Yara fuck off to the very end of the series. Cause that's how you do a payoff, bitches. And this goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning of this video in regards to how the three Greyjoys arcs wrap up. Theon saving Yara and defeating Euron in the process seems like it was meant to be the final trial for Theon, seeing as how much thematic weight doing so would hold. Saving Yara would not only be a repayment of her attempt to rescue him and a method of earning the respect of the other Ironborn, but defeating Euron, in addition to proving to the Ironborn that he's worth a damn, would also possibly avenge his father Balon, a way to prove to his father that he's a force to be reckoned with even after his father's death. So in my view, Theon's arc must end with Euron. So let's redo season 8 to make this happen. First thing, Theon obviously does not save Yara right away. Maybe we can have Theon try and fail to rescue her, or just cut that scene at the end of season 7 out where Theon rallies his remaining men. In any case, Theon is convinced by Sansa that unless they can defeat the Night King, Yara is dead no matter what, and therefore, Theon decides to travel to Winterfell and fight with the Northerners before he attempts to save Yara. Theon fights in the Battle of Winterfell just as he does in the show, but as detailed in Jaime's episode, Jaime will be the one who defends Bran in the Godswood, not Theon. I get the writers were trying to have this be Theon's penance to the Starks for what he did in season 2, but I would say that just fighting with them during the battle at all would be enough to prove his loyalty and repent for what he has done to them. And they already kind of hit the Stark redemption arc with his rescuing of Sansa in season 5. Also, the way he dies in the show is so fucking dumb. He just YOLO charges and then gets shanked, which amounts to nothing, so Yeah. So our rewrite will see Theon fighting in and surviving the Battle of Winterfell. As soon as the battle is over and the northern forces begin playing for their assault on King's Landing, Theon wants to lead an assault to rescue Yara, who is being held in the dungeons of King's Landing and not on Euron's ship. Not sure why Euron would keep her tied up in a place where if she escaped, she could easily slit his throat. As Dany and Jon make their way to King's Landing for their final confrontation with Cersei, Theon asks Jon to allow him to accompany them to King's Landing to bring his sister home, to which Jon agrees. Dany and co arrive at King's Landing and the Battle of King's Landing commences. Now, we discussed in Dany's episode that having the Scorpions on the streets of King's Landing would put Dany in a position where she may have to kill innocents in order to take King's Landing, thus making her stall for time, thus giving Cersei a sliver of a chance at holding the city. However, many of you in the comments mentioned that the fatal flaw with this idea would be the fact that there would be no way to keep the citizens of King's Landing close enough to the Scorpions in order to put them in harm's way, which is a great point and one I really didn't consider originally. Like, maybe they locked them in a house nearby or something, I'm not sure, but in any case, the citizens of King's Landing obviously wouldn't chill right next to the Scorpions. They'd haul their ass down the block. But what if they couldn't? What if they were put in a position where they couldn't run away? A position like on the ships of the Iron Fleet. Our scenario will see Euron, just before Dany and co arrive at King's Landing, promising citizens of the city refuge aboard his fleet ships. But in actuality, Euron is doing so in order to deter Dany from burning them as soon as she rolls up, which is exactly what she does in the show, which is actually a very book Euron thing to do. Just before the battle begins, a citizen is sent running from the front gates of King's Landing and informs Jon via Cersei and Euron's wishes that the Iron Fleet ships are filled with citizens of King's Landing. After Dany destroys the front gate, allowing Jon's forces to enter the city, Jon informs her of this, which gives her pause, knowing she must avoid burning Euron's ships, but also knowing that doing so puts her dragons in a far greater chance of peril. As the battle commences, Dany on Drogon and Rhaegal, rolling solo, fly over the streets of King's Landing, dodging projectiles from not only the Scorpions on the city walls and in the streets, but also from the Iron Fleet ships, the ones she cannot burn without killing innocents. As Jon's forces, which includes Theon, clash with the Golden Company on the city streets, Dany does her best to clear a path for them, destroying what Scorpions she can, trying her best to avoid killing civilians. But just then, a Scorpion bolt is fired from the Bay of Blackwater and kills Rhaegal, his body crashing onto the streets of King's Landing. And it's at this moment that Dany realizes that if Drogon is killed as well, she will lose her edge and Cersei may succeed in holding the city. And this is where she decides to commence her burning of King's Landing, burning not only the Scorpions on the streets of King's Landing, but also the ships of the Iron Fleet, which results in Dany killing hundreds, if not thousands, of innocents. Euron's ship is also burned, but he survives as he does in the show. We'll come back to him. Meanwhile, after seeing that Dany has begun her assault in the city, Theon parts from Jon and the others, knowing he only has a short time to rescue his sister Yara from the city's dungeon before Dany burns the Red Keep to the ground, taking his sister with it. Theon races into the dungeon and frees Yara, starving and weak. He drapes her arm around his shoulder and leads her from the dungeon onto the streets as the world ends around them. Theon tries to lead her through the streets, but most have been reduced to rubble. He looks to his left and sees a passageway leading to the walls of the city. Theon realizes it is his only hope as he leads his sister up the stairs. At the same time, Euron has washed up on the shore of King's Landing, hurt, exhausted, but alive. As he turns and sees the Iron Fleet reduced to ashes, he scoffs, knowing it is time to make his escape. But as he turns, he looks up and sees Theon and Yara making their way slowly across the walls of King's Landing. A devilish grin spreads across Euron's face as he rushes off. Quick edit, I know in Jaime's episode I kept in his and Euron's fight, as Jaime being mortally wounded is necessary for the resolution of his arc, but on second thought, I'm actually going to scratch that. Jaime will be mortally wounded when he meets Cersei in the Red Keep, but we'll discuss how that happens next episode. In our rewrite, Euron and Jaime will not face off as they did in the show. Anyway, back to it. Theon and Yara are on the walls of King's Landing, overlooking a massive drop into the water below. As Theon desperately drags his sister to safety, he looks to his right, seeing King's Landing reduced to rubble, and he looks to his left, seeing the once mighty Iron Fleet now nothing but driftwood. But that doesn't matter now, as all he cares about is getting Yara to safety. That is until Euron appears before them, having cut them off after he saw them earlier on the beach. Euron tells them his plan of returning to the Iron Islands and ruling them as there is no other Greyjoy to ascend to the Salt Throne. That is, for Yara, of course, and thus Euron does not plan to let her live. Euron tells Theon to step aside, that he will let him live as he is no threat to Euron's title of ruler of the Iron Islands. And here we see a parallel to Euron's attack on the Dornish in Season 7, with Euron baiting Theon to charge him to save his sister. But as we know, Theon jumps from the ship instead, resulting in Euron claiming him a coward. But right here, at this moment on the walls of King's Landing, his loving sister Yara, weak and injured behind him being her last line of defense. This time, Theon refuses to run, as he draws his sword and squares up with Euron. Theon charges, and he and Euron clash swords on the walls of King's Landing, overlooking the bay. Theon gives it his all, everything he's got, but it is clear he is no match for his uncle. And as Theon begins to become exhausted, Euron seals the deal, as he drives his sword through Theon's chest. As Yara cries out, Euron can only laugh as his nephew bleeds out in his sword, still clinging to life. Euron looks Theon straight in the eye, telling him that he is not a Greyjoy, not a Stark, he is nothing. But suddenly, Theon looks Euron in the eye and smiles, taking Euron off guard. And then, Theon makes his final sacrifice, as he grabs his uncle by the collar and flings them both over the walls of King's Landing, which would serve as a parallel to how Theon's father Balon died at the hands of Euron. Theon and Euron crash into the water below, both still alive, wrestling underwater as Euron struggles to break free from Theon's grasp, but Theon holds on as hard as he can, holding Euron under the water, as both of them slowly drown, their bodies sinking to the bottom of the sea. Quite fitting for a pair of Ironborn, I would say. Following the Battle of King's Landing, Yara returned to the Iron Islands to claim her position on the Salt Throne, all the while telling the other Ironborn of Theon's sacrifice, of how he risked everything to save her, of how he attained vengeance on the man who killed his father. In the end, Theon's sacrifice finally earned him the respect of the people he was so desperate to win over. In the end, he proved himself as both a loyal member of the Starks and the Ironborn, and though he ended up earning the respect and admiration from those whom he always sought it, he did what he did not for the glory or for the good graces that will fall upon his name for the years to come, but simply because it was what the man he grew into would do. In the end, without needing to be told by anyone else in the world, regardless of what house he was sworn to or fostered by, Theon Greyjoy knew exactly who he was. And that concludes this episode of Game of Thrones Rewrite. I hope we were able to deliver sweet, sweet catharsis to those of you emotionally scarred by the horrible iteration of Euron, or at least the criminally brutal reduction of the Greyjoy plot in general. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, consider supporting me on Patreon, and I know what y'all thinking, I just totally ripped off Sandor and the Mountains ending in the show and used it for Theon and Euron's ending, and you're goddamn right I did. But to make it up to y'all, I think you will enjoy what I have in store for our next episode subject, the Mad Dog himself, Sandor Clegane. As always, thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you next time.